Imagine that one day you meet a goddess that offers you a lot of power, but this power won't be free, so the goddess asks you for something, and that is to attack your friend that you've known for a long time, because this is a situation that the proto will have to live, so now he will have to decide if he will get the power or save his friend. But to know how the proto got to this situation, let's start from the beginning. Everything starts with our protagon, which is this girl called Elanora, which asks the proto to throw his bow, and the girl says to him, well, from now on your mind, wow, what luck some have. But before continuing, question of today's video: if you had a lamp like Aladdin's, but instead of having 3 wishes you only had 1, what would you ask? And don't cheat me that with the wish it is not worth asking for more wishes, but hey, leave me your answer in the comments. The king, I have not introduced you to the protagonist, but his name is Born, although he is also known by the world as Tiger of the World. And Tiger is very surprised, since in the environment there had been a terrible battle, and the protagonist sees that the one who caused all this was an Avanatis, and the protagonist only has 5 arrows of ammunition left, which is a problem, and the protagonist was about to be attacked, but he easily finished off the enemy. Although he lost the horse he wanted, it cannot be my transport. The protagonist sees in the distance 7 horses, and in one of the horses is a Vanatis, so the proto thinks that if the enemy is left without a general, then they will no longer be able to continue chasing his people, so the proto plans to attack. The proto who attacked 2 horses, and the waifu drew the sword, so he goes for the proto, but the proto only had 2 arrows, well 1, and the proto who ran out of ammunition. And we come to the moment when this girl asks the proto to throw his bow. Born was sleeping, and while he was sleeping, they tell us that there is a battle between 2 kingdoms, and we just see a memory of Born, since this story was being told to Born, and in this memories these 3 start to make fun of Born because they laugh at Born because he uses bow and record well in the mind the face of this guy, since it will be very important for later, or well, more or less here. Born also heard some guys talk about the Duke Camelin, since they say they envy the Duke, because he uses this war to collect 10 more and kidnap Doncellas, but in that memory gets a little strange. But that was because this girl was waking up to Born, since we remember that they took the protagonist as a prisoner, since they remember that he mentioned that there was a war between kingdoms. Well, it turns out that the protagonist is a prisoner of the enemy kingdom. So the enemy kingdom is asking a lot of money as a rescue for Born, but Born tells them that they are asking a lot of money, so he asks them if they can reduce it a bit, but they said no, so they give them a 50-day deadline for the money to arrive. Hey, for a question, what happens if they do not bring the money to rescue Born? Good question, Pikachu, because if they do not give the money for their rescue, the protagonist will have to belong to this girl according to the conditions of an agreement that is put. But there is also one thing that they want Born to do, since Elanora wants to see Born throw the bow. But Born was failing everything. They even made fun of him, but out of nowhere, that he spawns this guy and tries to attack Elanora, but they could stop his attack, so the guy proceeds to flee. But Born tells them that he will stop them, since Born says that he will hit them in the leg. And so it was, since this time Born did not fail, so all those who were making fun of Born were freaking out. The next day Born went to talk to Elanora, and asks her why they made him throw the bow yesterday. And they tell Born that this is because Elanora fell in love with him at first sight, a love that is not between enemies, or that is the rumor that everyone is telling in the kingdom. And Elanora says that maybe she does not feel love, but that she does feel admiration for the skill that Born has with the bow. And Elanora tells the proto that many of his have reacted exaggeratedly to that rumor, and that they could even try to end the rumor of raid by sending the proto with Diacito, and for that reason Elanora thought that the fastest way to end the rumor was to show everyone the ability that Born has with the bow. Here, he also confesses to the proto that if he captured him, it was not to ask for a rescue but for mere fun, since apparently the proto stopped Elanora, since Elanora was surprised that the proto in the situation in which they were was in a fighting spirit, so he thought it would be a shame to kill him. So he took him to his house, and Lim hates Born, but there is a reason for this, since the day the proto found Elanora, he charged a horse, which is Lim's face. In that is that Elanora asked Born to call her Elan, so we will call her that. But not only that, since Elan offered Born to work with her, even offers the same rank as she has in her kingdom, but Born refuses, although he thanks her, since he tells her that not even in his own kingdom. So Elan asks him why he did not accept his offer then, although Born tells him that he has a place to return to, a place to protect. And that place is Alsace, the territory that Born inherited from his father. But anyway, while the Protoss has no choice but to live in this kingdom, the Protoss traveling the kingdom meets a dragonborn, and this dragon is called Looney, and it is the dragon that is raising Ellen. Born was about to sleep until he was informed that they have caught an old man with the accent of the kingdom of which the Prota comes, and Born, if he knows the old man, the problem is the message with which the old man comes, since he tells Born that there is an army that is heading to the place that the Prota wants to protect, and that there are around of 3,000 soldiers. Born, when he hears this, he wants to go to protect his place, but at the door, he meets with him, which asks where he is going at that time, but the Prota tells him to let him pass. Born tells him that he has to return to his lands, but he tells him not to forget the situation in which he is, but Born tells him that he just wants to go protect his lands, and that once he finishes with the enemy, he will return. But Elan tells the Prota that he is crazy, since it would be 3,000 people against the Prota. So Elan and the Prota end up making a deal, since Elan will help the Prota, but this obviously will not be free, since Elan asks all his lands to the Prota in exchange for helping him protect them, to which Bronn says that if he governs the lands with justice and defends the peaceful lives of its inhabitants, there is a deal, so they end up making the deal. Meanwhile, the enemies go to the land of Born, and if you remember the guy I told you about, turns out he's commanding the army of 3,000 soldiers. They even took 2 dragons and everything, and the enemy entered the lands of the Protoss, but all the inhabitants had already taken refuge in a sanctuary, and this sanctuary can't be attacked, since if they attack all the temples of Brunn they could go against him, and that's not good for them. But everything rots here because they get to see the house of Born, and in that house is Tita, which was waiting for Born to arrive, and this guy started attacking Tita, and he got to a point where he wanted to fall, but luckily at that moment the Prota stopped him with an arrow, and the Prota saved Tita twice, since out of nowhere they tried to hit him with an arrow, but luckily at that moment the Prota stopped that arrow and even returned the arrow and everything. But the Prota, when returning the arrow, the bow broke a little, so Tita gives him another bow and tells him that it's time to use it, and this bow was told to the Prota that he only used it if he really wore the skirt, and this bow is really very important, since thanks to him the Prota will be able to contact a goddess, but that we will see later he and the Prota and the others managed to defeat 300 enemy soldiers in the city, but there were troops that managed to escape, so surely they would join their team. So right now, the enemy should be reorganizing, and the enemy commander unfortunately also managed to escape, but hey, the enemy's credit was 3,000, and if public school math doesn't fail, there are about 2,700 enemies left. But Ellen's team also had casualties, since of her 1,000 soldiers, only 900 can fight. As the protagonist knows the terrain, Ellen asks him where he thinks he could hide the enemy. The other protagonist tells him that maybe in the Moonshade Plain, since in that place he can take advantage of the power of his cavalry to the maximum. But anyway, Ellen plans to finish them off, while all the enemies retreat to the chopper, and this guy is freaking out because he wonders what the Ellen team is doing here. Again, he gets pissed off because we remember that Brunner would go to the hand with an arrow, so this guy gets angry and orders to send explorers, and he tells them that they can't go back until they know the number of their enemies, which would be the Ellen, and the Prota group Sien divided his remaining 2,700 soldiers into 3 groups, the first of 700 men, an infantry corps with archers and spearmen, the second a cavalry corps with the most resistant spears and armor of all, and finally, the main corps, composed of 1,000 men fighting in that plain. They can have a lot of advantage, and also this time they had 2 dragons, and the strategy of the team of Ellen is the following, since Ellen next to the protagonist will command 400 people, and Ellen tells Lynn that he is going to take care of the rest, and Ellen asks Lynn if he has any suggestions for the battle, to which Lynn tells him that he would like a rope, and when Lynn asked for the ropes, Tita quickly got all he could, and many of the people were cooperating bringing ropes, and everyone says they do it for Tigray, and the people also cooperates because they want to finish off Tenator, since basically Tenator's son is the one who is invading them with the 3,000 soldiers, and the battle is about to begin. Even Ellen asks the Proto if he's afraid, but the Proto obviously says no, so good, let the battle, until they ran into a dragon. And not even the Prota's arrows did anything to the dragon. So the enemy is like, look dad, pure dragon city. At that moment Kalin also arrived at the battlefield, and Kellen is going to face the dragon, and Ellen did not expect to be taken out by a dragon, but the Prota tells her that he is going to show her a trick, so Ellen takes out her sword, which begins to emanate a power, and this power was strong enough to finish off the dragon. The protagonist, after the attack of Ellen, was freaking out. So the protagonist says to him, "What was that? I had never seen it." To which Ellen says that obviously he will not see it because it is the first time he shows it. And Ellen tells him that it is so powerful that that's why he does not use it when he faces people. And meanwhile, Lin did not enter the battle, so he retired. But the enemies of the group of Lin began to chase them. But do you remember that Lin had asked for ropes? This is going to use it to stop the enemy. Ellen's team is winning the battle, so the enemies do not know what to do. So they suggest to Shaun to use the other dragon, but Shaun says to them, they are idiots. The enemy has already defeated the other dragon. What will we do if they finish this one too? So Shaun says that we have to retreat, but Shaun did not realize something. since some enemies that approached Shaun by the rear were not many, but those who were enough were the horses of support. So the Proto arrives with Xian and tells him that he will not be able to escape, but in that Xian tells Born to fight him one-on-one, or that he will flee as always, but the Proto that approaches him, and that if he thinks of fighting the Proto is attacking Xian with arrows, but Xian tells him to stop. That it is useless, although Xian did not realize something since the Proto was attacking him at the same point, so in one of those an attack of the Proto broke Xian's shield so the Proto could hit him with an arrow, but Xian grabs the other dragon and plan to escape, so the Proto while he sees Xian escaping with the dragon, he is like let him escape like that, but then the Arch of Boron starts talking to him and tells him to knock down the dragon, so the Proto is going to try to do it. And this time he launches an attack that is out of the ordinary so the Proto manages to knock down the dragon, and ends up defeating Shaun so the Proto sends the son of Thenardiel with God. Ellen went to wake up the Proto, but in her own way. And the Proto asks Ellen why she wakes him up at this time. To which Ellen tells him that today she goes to see the king. Ellen also tells the Proto that she thought of asking him what he thought to do from now on. To which the Proto is like, from now on, huh? Ellen is talking to Lynn, and tells him that she will return as soon as she has left the king silent. But before Ellen leaves, Ellen asks him why he trusts the Proto so much. To which Ellen tells him that in the first place because the Proto has an authentically interesting power, and he says that he can't be hated, and Ellen knows that Lynn has a similar feeling, and that Lynn says that he can share that feeling, but that he doesn't trust the Proto. But Ellen tells Lynn that in any case, she helps the Proto. Meanwhile, Thenardiel is angry, and the Proto sent the other neighborhood to his dragons. And the Proto is not enough to eliminate his dragons, since he also took his son, so clearly Thenardiel is very tempted. So he wants to take revenge on the Proto, and asks Ganelon how long the new dragon will take, to which he says a whole month, so they will have to fight against the Proto. The Sarash. Hey, a question. What is the Sarash? Or a question. Pikachu, since the Sarash is a squad of murderers, and against Elan they plan to send a Banades, since they say that they will use the trick of Banades against Banades. Meanwhile, Elan was in an audience with his king, so the king says to her, hey, is it true that you entered the kingdom of Brunn with an army without our permission? To which Elan says yes, so the king asks her what was her reason for doing that, and she says that depending on her answer, she will not hesitate to punish her insolence as it is due, and Elan replies that she was hired. To which the king and all those in the room are amazed, and the king asks her who hired her, and Elan replies that she was hired by Count Born, double of Brum and Lord of Alsace. And the king says, well, what does Born want? What does he aspire to? To which Elan says that according to Born's own words, he wants peace in Alsace, but the king gets mad and says, very nice, how did you put our kingdom in danger by using other peace as if they were mercenaries? But in that, this blonde gets in and asks the king for permission to speak, and this blonde girl is called Sophia, and Sophia tells him that Nibrun in the middle of a civil war would like to assume them as enemies, so she says that they probably want to know their real motives, so Sophia says that at that moment they can explain the position of the kingdom to them, and she says that if it is true that the problem is that Helene has acted without his permission, but Sophia argues that since the war has always been valued the speed, well, thanks to that cursed lip of Sophia, Ellen could get away. So Ellen thinks she was close since she almost started having problems with the king, in that Ellen was very calm, but another bandage approached her, and she says, well, I'm wondering who could be the one who would start a war without thinking, but who else than the bandage that is always giving so many airs, right, Elanora? And you as always still without developing, right, Ludmila? And well, Leonora and Ludmila have a kind of rivalry, so they started arguing, and they were about to start a fight and everything, but Sophia stopped them. The mage's count went to talk to the Proto, and the Proto explains to him all the situation that happened, and the count about the future, asks the Proto what he is going to do, to which the Proto tells him that he is going to fight against the Duke Thenardiel. The conversation with the mage's Proto went to the capital of Brum, to request an audience with the king. On the other hand, the Proto travels looking for allies. The Proto meets with Aelin, who tells him that he got the king's permission, but there are still 2 points to solve. And Aelin tells him that they are going to offer the kingdom all the lands of which it is in power, starting with the Ulsa. And the Proto asks how this affects the Ulsas, so they tell him that they basically want to turn the Ulsas into domains. And Aelin tells him that the fight has only just begun. And the second problem is that the king told Aelin to think carefully about the interests of his kingdom and not to carry out crazy actions, but his biggest problem will be the Vanadis, since Akellan says that in his kingdom there are 7 Vanadis just below the king and the nobles are much more below, but Akellan tells him that there is no one with enough power to defeat a Vanadi, so the problem would be the other Vanadis, since Akellan says that not all Vanadis are allies, but it's not like they're enemies either, although Akellan says that for now he only has to watch out for a Vanadi, and speaking of that Vanadi, just that appears, and this Vanadi is called Luzmila, but we will call her Mila. Mila says that she has come to see the Proto, but that it must be somewhere else, so they go to travel. While they are on the way, the Proto asks Mila what she wants to talk to him, to which Mila tells him that the Duke of Ternardia is a powerful man with allies, and tells him that one of his allies is her, and that he has no chance of winning. But in that, everything stops, and they realize that there is a trap ahead, and the group also realizes that they have been surrounded, and they begin to attack them. And those who are attacking them are nothing more and nothing less than seraphs, and in one of those that Aline is attacked with a snake, so the prototype will try to save her by removing the venom from the snake. Milo in the end ended up helping them, but Aline told her that she is not worthy of being a Venati, and since Aline is not well, she will go in search of a doctor for her. The panorama improves since Aline is better, and Aline told her that when she returns to the Lane Mary she will reinforce the surveillance of the borders, and just as Aline predicted, Mila gathered troops on the borders. In this way Aline was trapped in the forces of the Duke of Thenardier and Mila, so Duke Thenardier expected that Mila's gang fight with Ellen, so they will start a small fight between the troops, but that day nothing was solved and both armies suffered losses, so they withdrew their troops. The next day Ellen had the intention of continuing with the battle, but when they went to the battlefield they realized that Mila's army was no longer, and they say that apparently they are heading to the Tatara Mountains. So again a fight comes which ends in a draw, and Ellen says that if they keep fighting like this it's going to take too long, so Ellen wants to end this as soon as possible. But the protagonist tells Ellen not to rush and to listen to the plan in her mind, and the protagonist's plan is to disguise as a bear. The Proto was disguised with the objective of exploring the terrain and find a way to the top of the mountain, but it was a coincidence that he met Mila. But as the Proto was disguised, she did not recognize him, although he could see his ability with the bow. Mila asks the Proto why he does not take off his disguise, since he tells her that while he is with her, he does not have to worry about the wind, the cold or the snow, but the Proto saves her with a cursed lip since he tells her that the laws of Sol de Ale prohibit him from taking off the clothes he wears while he is in the mountain. As Mila saw that the Proto has a lot of talent with the bow, she proposes that he work for her, but the Proto tells her that he comes from far away and that he does not want to separate from his homeland. The Proto continues to act as if he did not know Luzmila, so he asks her, "Hey, are you a Vanadis?" To which Luzmila says yes, but it seems as if this news did not surprise her. But well, in the cave they are going to spend a very quiet time, if even Luzmila makes tea for the Proto and everything, so they spend a pleasant time drinking tea. But there was something that worried Mila, and the Proto realized that, so he told her that if she wants she can tell her what happens to what Mila tells her, that when they chose her as a Vanadis, the pride and the weight of responsibility fell on her, but that her country has to join disgusting people, and has to hide her feelings for that pride. And in the end the Protaz left Mila without her realizing her true identity, and could find the way she wanted, so he went to look for Ellen and the others to go, but when they returned to the place, they had more reinforcements, but still, they are not going to withdraw. And Ellen said she was going to break the castle door, but her attack didn't work, so Ellen got in danger. But luckily the Proto went to save her, and they didn't have many options, so the Proto comes up with a great idea of asking to lend his power to Ellen's sword, and this worked since thanks to that they can break the castle door, so Ellen's army proceeds to enter the castle. Ellen finally meets with Mila, so the Battle of Vanadis begins, but in that middle of the battle Azeroth appears who wants to attack Mila, but the Proto with his bow acts in time since he stops the guy. But Mila, when she sees the ability of the Proto, she remembers the boy she met in the mountains, so she realizes that it was the Proto. Mila asks Born why he saved her, since he tells her that perfectly she could wait for the Azeroth to finish her, and that after that she could finish the Azeroth, so the Proto tells her that was his way of thanking him, the tea they drank in the mountains. And in the end everything went well for the Protoss, since Mila decided that she would not lend help to the Duke of Thenardier, but this Duke apparently already had foreseen that something like this would happen, so the Duke through a royal order sent Roland, which was the strongest of all the Knights of Brunn. The objective that Roland has is obviously the Protoss, while giving the Protoss was Ratran Capolanga, and in that appeared the dragon that was raising Elin, and in this incident the protagonist met the Venati Sophia, which came as a messenger, but it does not bring them good news, since he tells them that the King of Brum is sick lying in his bed, so he could not speak directly to him. But there is more news for the protagonist, since they tell him that he has been stripped of his title of Count, of his house and of his rights as vassal of Brum, so they tell him that his land will be directly governed by the king. The protagonist is informed that an army is coming here now ruled by Roland, nicknamed the Black Knight. But they also say that Roland has not lost a single fight since he was named knight at just 13 years old. And when he goes with his army, he carries the sword of Urandal, which is a national treasure, and the army battle begins. Meanwhile, Ellen was fighting with Roland, but Ellen was in trouble, but just at that moment the protagonist arrived at the rescue, and was able to save Ellen. The problem is that the protagonist in this interaction that he had with Roland was injured, and the enemy army was about to reach him, but at that moment that Sophie arrived, She told Elan to leave this to her. Sophia stopped the army with her ability, since she created a light barrier, but that did not stop Roland. So Sophia was fighting for a while with Roland, but in that Sophia does a trick. Since she disappears, since Sophia was just buying time for Elan to escape with the protagonist. Since we remember that he is hurt and Roland only receives orders from the king, but let's remember that the king is sick and Thénardier took advantage of this opportunity to tell Roland that it was an order of the king to finish the protagonist. And since Roland could not see the king and the order was given to Thénardier, this does not give him much confidence. So Roland thinks that when he finishes with all this matter, he has to go see the king. Thanks to the arrival of Mosshat, the army stopped the persecution, but meanwhile the protagonist does not lower his fever and the wound he has is a bit serious. The next morning the protagonist finally regains his knowledge and the prota hasn't fully recovered, but for some reason his bow is taking him somewhere. The bow took Born to a strange ruin, and in that ruin was found Tirnafa, the goddess that ruled over the night, darkness and death. So the prota starts calling Tirnafa, asking if she called him, and since the prota was accompanied by Tita through Tita, Tirnafa starts communicating with the prota. Tirnafa tells the prota that she didn't call him and that she also says you came because you want power, right? Tirnafa also informs the prota that while he is here, his friends and companions fight to the death. So the prota tells him, if I say it's true that I want power, what would you give me? To which Tirnafa tells him that he will give him power if he proves that he really wants power. So he asks him to attack Tita, and he tells him that if he manages to master his bow, he will give him power. To which the prota decides to shoot Tita. But the prota was able to control the power so that just when the arrow is about to hit Tita, it would destroy itself. And after that, the ruin disappeared. Meanwhile, Elan was fighting with Roland and Sophia came to help her, but even so this did not work against Roland, and at that moment Calprita arrived. The prota throws an arrow with a lot of power to Roland, but after that attack he can still continue, or that was what it seemed, since Roland realized that he cannot raise his arms. So he cannot continue, so Roland surrenders, and that the Protoss after that attack lost consciousness after his defeat. Roland tells the Protoss that he wants to go to the capital to see the king since Roland wants to get an audience for the Protoss, but the Protoss tells him that it is dangerous since the Count of Moschus was in the capital, and they tried to kill him, but Roland tells him that as a knight he must correct mistakes. Meanwhile, Elan had received an important message, so he tells the Brodak to return to the kingdom. And Elan tells him to go see a friend of Vanadis, with whom he is in debt, basically his best friend, which is called Alexandra, although Elan calls her Sasha. Since it turns out that another Vanadis is about to invade the territory that Sasha governs, so Elan wants to go defend her. Meanwhile, Roland went to the capital, tells the guards that he needs to talk to the king, so Roland is sent to a room. But this was a trap, so they send him bees, and who did this was Ganelone, and Ganelone tells him that bees have a deadly poison capable of killing a lion, and sadly, that's how it was, because Moschus tells the news to the Proto that Roland is dead, but Roland kept his pride until the end because he died standing, and all but Roland before leaving had trusted him during the Proto, so there goes a big one. No Roland, why? Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Moschenal was the only one of all the neighboring kingdoms where slavery existed, and they used to attack their neighbors to loot and destroy. So Moschenal had invaded Brunn with an army of about 20,000 soldiers, and who is the leader and commands to do all these things to the army of Muozinal is nothing more and nothing less than Barbarossa. The Proto went with 700 soldiers to the south and went to exorbit the army of Muozinal, and the Proto says that he will not be enough to expel the enemy, since he wants to save all the people he can. In that the Proto sees that a person is being chased by several soldiers, but he was able to save her. And remember well of this person who saved the Proto, since she is not a common person and will be very important for later, although her identity will be revealed later. Meanwhile, in the army of Morsenel, they inform the captain that an enemy army has appeared which they believe is from Brunn, to which the captain asks how many enemies are, so they tell him that between 100 and 200 soldiers, so the captain sends 3,000 soldiers to defeat the army, but when they arrived, the protagonist and the army were already waiting for them, so they won that battle. And the protagonist finally meets face to face with the enemy army, so a battle comes which ends up winning the Protoss and can save the people who were captured as prisoners in the battle. That the Protoss had several soldiers managed to escape and left with the rest of the army of Mugo without him, so the Protoss will have to fight again. But this time the panorama is complicated for the Protoss because there are many soldiers, but just at that moment that Mila arrives to help the Protoss. Meanwhile, Ellen is on her way to visit her best friend, which is sick, and as they are attacking her land, she cannot do anything, but this is because she is sick, since the best friend of Ellen is very powerful. In fact, a long time ago, when Mila and Ellen were fighting, Ellen's best friend came to stop her, but not only that, because if she saw them fighting, She told them that she was going to fight them, and on top of that, the friend was so overwhelmed that she told them that to save time, they could both attack at the same time. In fact, she was so confident that she told them that if one of them manages to at least scratch her, she will do whatever the two of them want all day. But even so, Mila and Ellen together couldn't do any scratches on her, so they can imagine how strong she was when she was in her prime.
¡El diablo!
Ellen arrived with her friend, who tells her that the one invading her lands is the Princess of Lightning, the Whirlwind of Thunder, Elizabeth Famina. But we'll call her Ellie. Ellen asks why Ellie put her to move her troops. Here Sasha tells her that in the middle of this summer, she and Ellie collaborated, launching a campaign against the pirates of the coast. Well, the whole problem arose later, as Ellie claims that Sasha's forces incited the pirates to attack her. And it is because of that that Ellie is directing her troops towards Sasha's domain. But Ellen says she will be in charge of expelling Ellie and her troops. Meanwhile, Tripreta made a deal for Mila to ally with him, and also made the person he rescued eat, since he didn't want to eat. Another fight was seen, since the Elan army is going to fight the Eli army, and the two Vanitas, who also start fighting. And this looked like a draw, but Elan almost took advantage, and Elan could have finished her off here. But Eli told her about the situation where Brunn was, that they were being invaded, so in the end they reached an agreement. So they make a non-aggression pact for a year, but Eli adds to the deal that Eli has to apologize to Sasha, so they end up making a deal. Mila and the Prota were planning a strategy for the battle against Mosinal, since Mila says that you have to destroy Mosinal's army. In a single battle, the Prota and Mila will have to face the Redbeard's army, and the nickname of Redbeard that he has is for a reason. And not just for his beard, because a long time ago, an army built a fleet of around 1,000 ships and they invaded Mos in it, but since then, Redbeard finished them, and it was in that battle that finished them, and it was in that battle that that nickname was won. So the battle begins, and Mila had a good strategy, since they even had disguised soldiers, so they could surprise the enemy. But anyway, as the enemy was more, Mila's army also had casualties, so Mila and the Prota were losing Buit, thanks to the script. Just at that moment reinforcements arrived, and the reinforcements did not stop coming. Since Masha arrived leading an army, so she had no choice but to withdraw her army, and since the enemy withdrew for Mila, it is a victory. And Mila and the Prota were so tired that they fell asleep, and the next day, finally, he returned. The Prota is going to take a big surprise, since the Prince Egnes is supposed to be dead. It is supposed, since it is remembered in the person that the Prota saved from the army of Mu. Without him, it turns out that this person is the Prince Egnes, and that was a surprise for everyone. Even Amashazada fainted when he found out, but the surprises do not end here, since the Prince Egnes is actually a girl, and all this time Le Guin had to pretend to be a man, since in Brunn the queen who only gives birth to women is repudiated, and that's why, to protect his mother, he pretended to be a boy. But hey, the Prota asks Legion if there is any way to prove that he is the king's daughter, to which Legion tells him that in Artesium there is a door that only the members of the royal family can open, so the Prota decides to go to Artesium. But Thénardier will also go to Artesium, since he wants to prevent the Prota's goal, and on the way the Prota meets the army of Thénardier, which is of 24,000 soldiers, while the army of the Prota is 20,000. So a battle begins, and as Thénardier had dragons, the Vanitas went to fight the dragons, and managed to defeat one, but the next was much more resistant. Even Yelian was injured, and the battle continued for a while more, until both armies had to retreat. But 2 hours later, the armies fought again, while the Vanitas went for the dragons. And for the dragon that was left by a combined attack, they could defeat him. After the battle, the Prota continues with the plan that he had in mind, to show that the Princess Legging belongs to the royal family. The Prota with Legging and the others went to a sanctuary, in which they found a secret path. But on that route they finally found face to face with Thénardier, which has as its objective to end the life of Legging. So again they are going to fight, and Alan went directly to attack Thénardier. But the thing is going to get more complicated, since the place where they were fighting begins to collapse, so they have to retreat. Although the Prota had been trapped, but using his power he was able to leave. But during the battle and the test of the Prota he lost someone important, but I'll explain you. Since the Prota at the time in which he was going to be trapped in the cave, he was going to be attacked by the enemy, but at this moment this old man got in, saving the Prota. However, he received the impact by the Prota, and when the Prota realized Bernard, the old man who saved him, had a great wound, so here will be the last moments for Bernard and the Prota, seeing the wound of Bernard. Remember that he saved him, so the Prota is in shock, but meanwhile Bernard is only worried about the Prota, and asks him if he is okay, and Bernard is like, wow, This old man still can make an effort, and that he was wearing armor, and the Prota really gets very sad because Bernard belongs to Alsace and the Prota. This is going to hurt him even more because he has known Bernard since he was a child, so Bernard, after saying goodbye to the Prota, sadly dies. I understand, no Bernard, you don't. I love you too, but Bauduin comes with more news. He arrives to the war, and he is better. He tells them that apparently Ganelon had poisoned him, and Bauduin asks the Prota what are his intentions, to which the Prota says that he will defeat Thénardier, and that once he achieves that and gives peace in Alsace he will return with him as a war prisoner. But Bauduin also came with a mission for them, and he wants them to take the princess to Nyrs, but this will not be so easy, so it will be the final battle against Thénardier, so we will finally see the Prota fight against Thénardier, and both really have a lot of trouble since on the one hand, Thénardier wanted to invade the Proto's lands, and on the other hand the Proto killed Thénardier's son, so in this battle they are going to take everything they have on their hands, although the Proto was about to be dominated by hate, but luckily, Aaron made him to be rescued, and the Proto is going to finish all of this with a single arrow, and obviously he can achieve what you expected. That Proto, you can finish this with a single arrow, and obviously you can achieve what you expected from that Proto in this way. The Proto put an end to the war, finally bringing peace around, and above all else, his land. That is what the Proto wanted, and with the victory of this battle, it could also be said that the Proto could avenge Bernard, so wherever you are Bernard, know that we will take you in our hearts. The Proto was able to return with Princess Brun, and Legend can finally see his father. Legend's father gives the Proto the title of Knight of the Moonlight Lumiere, but this is not just any title, since they say that the person who receives this title will become the new king. So with the reception of the title of Knight of the Moonlight, ends all this, more or less.